Real quick show of hands. How many people in my audience know who Eleanor of Aquitaine was? She was one of the most powerful women that ever lived in medieval Europe. Now, some are probably scratching their heads. Florida Maquis, first of all, what does this have to do with anything? And number two, I've never heard of a place called Aquitaine. Are you sure this isn't something out of some kind of strange video game or World of Warcraft fantasy land? No, absolutely not. Look it up. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Aquitaine was a region in the southwest of France. Now, some might ask themselves, well, why didn't they just all have unity and call it France back then? What was really the difference between an Aquitanian and a Neustrian or a Burgundian or a Provincian or whatever they call themselves? Well, guess what? This is from about 700 AD, the map. Here's that same general map in 1314. 600 years later, you had France and the Holy Roman Empire, but look at this. You had Masovians, Serbians, and Bulgarians. Byzantine Empire, something called the Golden Horde, the Teutonic Order. Who knew? Things could change so much amongst people that are, you ready for this? All white. They're all white people. So why was there such division? Were there any rich men north of anywhere keeping them apart and causing this? Or were people just dividing themselves based on culture, based on the right of free association? Does this surprise anybody now? Especially after 2020. This idea that we're all the same is laughable, is it not? It's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? To say that a Californian and their beliefs and their values reflect in any way, shape, or form the values of a Floridian. They laugh at us, we laugh at them. Same thing with New York and Texas. You couldn't find people any more different. Tennessee and Oregon, or Tennessee and Minnesota even. Very, very different folks. Now, we're going to get into this, and believe it or not, I'm going to actually issue a conditional apology to Mr. Oliver Anthony. I'm sure that's why a lot of you are here. There's something he said today in a part 2 of his introduction that I think gives us more of an illumination as to what's really going on. Real quick, though, I just want to say, as always, be thankful for everything that I have. To everyone who's signed up here, who's here at YouTube and also at the Patreon channel, only $1. It's only $1 per month, even less if you sign up for an entire year. Fully refundable first 90 days, no questions asked. Heads up, we're going to have a brand new video over there, probably in the next 48 to 72 hours, next 2 to 3 days. Would love to have you, could sure use your support, would make a giant, giant difference. Those of you who are already over there, God bless every single one of you. I value you and pray for you and everyone else every single day. Now, Mr. Anthony, I would like to offer a conditional apology. While I still stand by my statement that I think you have a great many things in your life that you need to be thankful for, a great many more things than other folks, and right out of the gate, the idea of coming up with a song that points the finger at rich men north of Richmond, men who have more. You made this comment about people keeping us divided and how you were aggravated that a lot of people from the right have all of a sudden thought that you were part of their group when you're not. Same people from the left think that you're against them and you're not. Believe me, I know what that's like. I know what's that like when you don't exactly follow and worship Trump, or what you don't exactly hop on board with Hillary Clinton either, when you're somewhere out there in the middle. I do, however, believe, and this is where my apology is rooted in, that you're a bit of an idealist. And sometimes when you get old like me, you forget what 30 is like, 28, 29, and you have this notion that if government went away, if Washington, D.C. went away, or those men were making less money, or whatever, we would all come together and we would be united. History doesn't show that. It's not the case. It's never been the case. And I can prove it from even 100 years ago. This is a man who came to this country from India. At this time, back in 1923, only 100 years ago, he was denied U.S. citizenship because he wasn't white. Now, you might think, so he was against the law that said only white people could be naturalized citizens. No, he wasn't against that law. He himself, Bhagat Singh Thind, 1923, argued he was a high caste Hindu Aryan and should be classified as white because of the common background. Now think about this for just a minute. This guy had no problem with a caste system. No problem whatsoever. In India, he was the highest caste you could be. He didn't see himself as equal to those lower caste people, but he came here to the United States and they wouldn't let him become a U.S. naturalized citizen because he could not be classified as white. The Supreme Court ruled this, United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind. This wasn't 1822, this wasn't 1751, this was 1923, based on the Naturalization Act of 1906, which allowed only free white persons and aliens of African nativity and persons of African descent to become United States citizens by naturalization. Here was an article from that time. Now, you ready for this? This, like I said, this isn't 1823. This isn't 1615. This is 1923, United States, California. Not even the high caste of Brahmin, though scientists may maintain that his Aryan ancestors came from the same Caucasian stock as our own, can any longer, the Fresno, California Morning Republic points out, be considered white in this country. The recent decision of the Supreme Court of the United States that Hindus are not free white persons has been hailed for the most part with delight by the California press and that of our western seaboard, which we find has a Hindu problem just as much as a Japanese problem 20 years before the war. And the Fresno paper opines that, quote, this is surely an instance in which a court has decided on facts and not on inferences. This is the caste system in India. There's the Brahmin, which is where Vivek Ramaswamy comes from, priests and academics. There's the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, the Sudra, and then there's the untouchables. Now, you might ask, where did they get this idea? They didn't get it from America. They didn't get it from Europe. Where did they get it from? Egypt. Pharaoh. Government officials, soldiers, scribes, merchants, craftsmen. They had a division system there too, thousands of years ago. Europe. Feudalism, monarchs, landed gentry, clergy. This is not new. The idea of being divided is not new. Even when left to our own devices and thrown in prison and forgotten about, what happens? Latins, African Americans, and white people all self-segregate. Freedom of association. So, believe me, when I tell you, I understand very clearly what it's like to not fit in any one group. And also, as an aside, I love Resonator guitars, and before the, well, I don't know if I'll say this. Well, I probably should. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Before the powers that be here at YouTube decided to destroy mine and a lot of other channels, I was going to buy one. It was my next on the list type of guitar to buy, but can't afford it these days. It's just the way it is. That's how catastrophic it's gotten. So there's a lot of us out there hurting. I get it. I get what you're saying. There are a lot of people out there hurting. But the one comment you made about in the song about the obese milk and welfare, most of America, huge chunk of America is already obese. So if folks fall on hard times, they're not changing their shopping patterns. If folks fall on hard times and they get food stamps or they get welfare, they're going to go buy the same stuff they were buying before. And one of the main drivers of obesity is depression. And I can think of no greater reason to be depressed than to be at a point where your life where you have to be living off welfare and living off of government handouts. And that will exacerbate weight gain like nobody's business. So, God bless you in your mission. I appreciate it. I'll reiterate the fact. You opened the book. You spoke the word of God. Praise God for that. You're going to see a lot of stuff in that book, if you continue to read it, where there's a lot of unfair stuff that happens to a lot of unfair people. Pardon me. A lot of unfair stuff that happens to a lot of innocent people. And they just are counseled to rise above and be thankful for what we do have. It's even in the Lord's Prayer. Now, speaking of that, I'd like to share something with you in her own words, where the Patriot Nurse echoes something that I've been talking about for the last year and a half, and I've never heard her say it quite this eloquently. We're going to listen for about a minute. It is exactly the right advice.
And I see that ultimately people are getting to a point where they're so desperate, and where all of these preconceived notions of norms are being taken away from them, that they have very little left to lose. And I can't say I blame people for it. Whether it's a dude getting in a shootout in Pittsburgh because he doesn't want to be evicted from his home, or little bit by little bit, people just not complying, whether it's with taxes or whether it's any number of things. We are headed for some major turmoil here. And I'm not surprised about it. I am more resolute now to maintain my freedom, because I can tell you, unless you are a high-profile individual, and unless you have cameras on you at every second of the day, going into any government custody is the most dangerous place that you could possibly be. There is no justice with them. It's about money and power. Money and power. And because they have no justice, they have no legitimacy.
Exactly right. Exactly right. The counsel is, do anything and everything that you could possibly do to not end up homeless. Do not end up in the crosshairs of government where you could be rounded up. And what does that mean? That means money. I'm just going to say it. Now, there are folks out there, men, get homeless, and it is a kind of a kick in the you-know-where sometimes. It's an injury to the pride. And it's something we have to deal with for us. It's rough. It makes you rearrange your priorities real fast. And when they come pick people up, and they want to toss them to FEMA camp, when it's a bunch of men, okay, that's one thing. But for women in my audience, make no mistake, it's catastrophically different. It is catastrophically different. There are a lot of people out there that like to waggle their high-minded and moral fingers. Do whatever needs to be done to not end up in one of these camps. And I think it was the unspoken words that she said, that she's more resolute, more now than ever, to do whatever needs to be done, no matter what, to maintain freedom, to maintain your liberty, because once they get a hold of you, it's over. It is over. Coming back and saying, well, at some point in the future, I'm going to find some luck again, and I'm going to get back on my feet and get back inside four walls. Keep the four walls you have. Keep the four walls you have. Being out, being on your own, especially there's folks out there that says, well, I'm going to go live in a camper, or I'm going to go live on the road. When they start doing the mass sweeps, they're not going to differentiate you living in a tent from somebody who doesn't have a home to go back to. You might get caught up. You wouldn't catch me dead at a campground these days, because that's where they're going to start. You mark my words, that's where they're going to start. When they start picking people up and they start throwing people in FEMA Walmart camps and these re-education centers, they're going to start at the campgrounds. They're going to start in the street where they can get everybody else, and they're going to say, look, I have a home. Sorry, they told us to get everybody out of this camp, and that's what they're going to do. You wouldn't catch me in a camper. You wouldn't catch me anywhere out like that. Stay home. Have a home. And do whatever you need to do to keep that home. And that was always my message about this. Some people took it the wrong way, that I was trying to justify some kind of immorality. Any decision you make that keeps you flush with enough cash to pay your bills, keep the lights on, keep four walls around you. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I have a small 3-2 here in Florida. The biggest value of my little 3-2 here in Florida is the bubble of air around my 3-2, known as my yard. That's the biggest key. That's the biggest thing for me, to not have anybody on the other side of these walls. Now, on another note, real quick, apparently there's some type of a disturbance in the Gulf of Florida down by Cuba. I don't know if they're going to say much about it, but I always want to remind everyone about Track the Tropics, just like it sounds. TRACKTHETROPICS.com, trackthetropics.com. We are going, of course, into storm season here, and this new disturbance apparently has some track that takes it over the panhandle of Florida, north of Tampa, something like that. But best information out there, just like it sounds, Track the Tropics, all one word.com. So I will leave it there. There is a wonderful, and I'll give you a link to this. If you want to see people dividing themselves without any impetus from anybody else over 1,000 years, there's this wonderful channel, Katerina Peter. She's only got 395 subscribers, and I'll give you the link. She does a time-lapse map of Europe from 1000 AD to 2000. And every time you see a change, what you're seeing is people saying, we want to separate from these other people. They're not being forced. Some of this was the result of war, but especially with what happens to the Holy Roman Empire, that was all people. That was all people wanting to be divided, wanting to be divided, desiring to come out from among them and be ye separate. This has been the nature of mankind. I'm not in the sense that I'm not castigating the man for saying that Washington, D.C. is the answer to everything. But believe me, when I tell you, brother, I say this in love. If Washington, D.C. went away and we went back down to 50 state governments, that'd be the best thing that could happen. That would be the best thing that could happen from my perspective. But if you decided to take that away and take away the 50 state governments and went down to where there were none, you would see division like you've never seen before. You would see it's happening right now. People are voting with their feet. Freedom of association. Sometimes there's reasons to not be divided, but sometimes there's reasons to be divided and to not be part of this. So this is something else that in other videos the Patriot Nurse has talked about. How there's just certain kinds of people you don't want to have around. In fact, she has one specific video where she talks about the 4 specific kinds of people you don't want in your survival group. And how you are to, if you're under good counsel, to divide yourself from them and not be a part of that. And not have them around. So division in and of itself is not always a bad thing. And diversity, for its own sake, is not always a great thing. So I will leave it there, but good luck with your career. He got himself apparently a good taste of Trashville himself. I got a good taste of it back in the 90s when I was down there. So Nashville, even though it's in what you would call a red state, and it's someplace you think, gosh, they have all these wonderful good and Christian values, there are more liberals and leftists and hookers and drug dealers in Nashville than there is in LA. Per capita, probably more. So I will leave it there. God bless every one of you. Sure appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.